Hello and welcome to the Serenity Journey. This is James. Welcome to our show. Thank you for joining us today. We are here talking about problems. A lot of people are struggling right now. There's a lot of people that are having a lot of problems in their lives and they don't know how to overcome them. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books. I've been doing a series on Dr. Wayne Dyer's 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace. Principle number 5 is you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. When we have a problem in our mind, when we try to approach the problem from the same mindset, the same mentality, the same way of looking at things that created the problem in the first place, we cannot find a resolution to the problem. And so today I'm going to be talking about the principles of this principle. We're going to be talking about how to shift our awareness to different levels of consciousness. The way I look at it, one of the things that I found is in my own life is that when I have a problem, it's because I'm looking at it from the wrong level of consciousness. And as I raise my awareness, as I raise my own consciousness, as I take that spiritual journey up into higher levels of consciousness myself, I'm able to see solutions to the problems that I think I have. Because the reality is that every problem you think you have is just an illusion created by the ego. Because nothing, when you get into higher levels of consciousness, you realize nothing ever goes wrong. Because everything is designed, everything has a plan, and everything goes exactly the way it's supposed to go. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about as we get into understanding these higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of awareness. I'm going to be talking today about my mic is low. Okay, let me pull it up just a little bit. There we go. Is that better? Hopefully, that's going to be better. I'm not sure what caused that. We'll change the gain just a little bit. I got my gain really low because I got a lot of background noise I'm trying to cancel out. So hopefully that will reach better. I'm not peeking on my monitor here. And see. Everything's up. That's all the way up. Yeah, so that should be better, hopefully. All right. So we have these different levels of consciousness that we go through. As we go through this process of awakening, as we go through trying to develop higher levels of interest ourselves, we start finding that we have higher levels of consciousness within ourselves, the ability to achieve different states in our mind. What some people call a peak mental and emotional state is really kind of at the top of your awareness, at the top of what you can achieve in your life. But a lot of people try to live their entire life at those peak states, and those peak states are really the peak. They're the highest of what we can get. They're not where we should be. But when we have a problem, when we go into those peak states of awareness, those peak states of a consciousness, then this allows us the opportunity to get a different perspective on the problem, to be able to look at it and approach it in a different way. And so we have a lot of areas in our lives. Maybe it's in your finances, in your money problems. One of the biggest areas of life that a lot of people struggle with is financially. I've had a lot of financial struggles in my own life. And whenever I want to solve those problems, when I wanted to change my financial situation, I got myself out of debt. I got myself emergency savings. I got myself all these things. But I had to change my consciousness around money in order to make those shifts and make those changes in my life. In relationships, we have our intimate relationships, our marriages, our intimate partnerships. We have to shift our consciousness and our beliefs about those relationships in order for them to heal, in order to solve problems in them. You cannot solve the problems from the same place. And I've been in a place where I've been in really low consciousness in my relationships, and we've had a lot of anger, frustration, a lot of fighting, and you can't resolve those problems from that place. You have to move higher, move to a higher vibration, a higher level of thought. in order to resolve those problems. I've had these problems in my relationships with other people, in consciousness, and in friendships, community relationships. So I thought we also have, you know, re- problems in maybe our job, in our career. We have problems and struggles and conflicts in how we perform our job or what our job is or whether we feel like we're doing something that contributes to the world. I've had a lot of conflict over people in the area of career, especially in the last year and a half since I've been focusing on my content creation, because a lot of people think that, we should go out and get a real job and we should have a traditional career and we should do things, and a lot of people also combine career and money, and they think they're the same thing. They think that their money comes from their career, and in some cases, this is true, but they're not the same thing. They're actually two separate things that you combine together. If your belief is that the only way you make money is through your career, then that's the only way you're going to make money. But when you open your awareness and you look outside of realizing that those are two separate aspects of your life, and that you can have a career that is extremely fulfilling and may not make you much money, but you can make more money in other ways outside of your career, and that there's other things you can do vibrationally, and there's other things as you raise your consciousness to bring that abundance to you, and it doesn't have to come through your career. I'm working here and I spend most of my time working here on YouTube, creating content, creating videos for people, helping people, coaching and consulting with people one-on-one. But most of that time I don't get paid for. Now, I'm not in the monetization program. I'm a very small channel. I've got other channels that I run too, but none of them are in the partner program because I'm a squirrel brain and I'm scattered and I go all over the place. Um, but the thing is that I still am able to make my ends meet, make my mortgage payments, getting things because we have money coming in from other places outside of the work that I do. But the work that I do is my calling. This is my passion. This is what I know and I know that the monetization and money will come through this eventually in time, but I'm not in that place yet. So that's the thing, is you have to realize that your career, especially getting into your ideal career, getting into it may not make you a lot of money at first, but over time it has the potential to make you more money than anything else in your life when you find alignment with that purpose and with that intention that you came to this planet to do. But it won't start there. It's something that has to grow over time. And working in a career just for money, I can tell you, will lead to misery and heartache. Most of the problems I had in my relationships, in my marriage, in myself, in a lot of things is because I was working in jobs just for the sake of money, for the sake of benefits, for the sake of things. And I hated the jobs that I worked at. I hated the things that I was doing. I couldn't stand it. I was absolutely miserable inside myself because I was working for money instead of working to serve people, instead of working to do something that I felt was beneficial to other people. And it's not that what I did was not beneficial to people, it's just I was not passionate about what I was doing. I was not connected to what I was doing. And so I really, really believe in finding that passion, finding that purpose, and creating your job, creating your life around living that purpose in your career, in your finances. It's really, I watch a lot of Abraham Hicks, and I love her teachings on the law of attraction and manifestation. If you follow Abraham Hicks, one of the things she talks about all the time is the path of least resistance to your manifestations. And the path of least resistance to your manifestations is finding your purpose and intention, aligning your life in every aspect with that purpose and living from that place. That is the path of least resistance to getting everything you want out of life, to being fulfilled. You can be extremely fulfilled with a lot less stuff if you're living from your purpose and your passion, because your purpose and passion is what gives you your fulfillment, not surrounding yourself with a bunch of stuff. And the funny thing is, when you do that and you find that alignment because you found it without the stuff, now you're open to allowing the stuff to show up in abundance in your life. It's one of the keys to understanding the law of attraction. It's a key to understanding how to solve your problems. getting yourself into alignment with spirit, with source, and with your higher consciousness. So that's one of the key things. The other area of our lives that we have a lot of stress and a lot of problems in is our physical health, our physical well being. You know, we don't take care of ourselves. Most people on the planet do not eat healthily, especially here in the US. Most people do not eat a healthy diet. And that's why so many people are obese. That's why so many people are having health problems. That's why we have so many things going on because we're not taking care of our health. And we have to make taking care of our bodies, taking care of our physical health, taking care of our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, making our health and well being a priority in our lives. And this is one of the key areas of life where we have a lot of problems because we don't take care of it, we don't take control of it, and we don't change. Again, you can't solve the problems in your health with the same behaviors, with the same habits, with the same mindset that created them in the first place. If you're diabetic and you don't quit eating sugar and putting things into your body that are turning into sugar, which is all those carbohydrates, all the sugars, all the things that turn into sugar inside your body, if you do not eliminate some of those things from your diet, don't eliminate them completely, but start controlling your intake, you're never going to get control of your diabetes. But I've seen study after study after study of people who have not only gotten off of insulin and medication and been able to control the diabetes completely through diet because of making a mind shift in how they think about food, how they think about what they put into their body. You have to do it in your mind shift first. You have to take a different awareness of what you're putting into your body. You have to have a higher level of awareness of your place and purpose and passion in this world as well. Again, that will affect your health. It will affect the amount of stress in your body. Stress is in your body is a physical manifestation of your emotional well-being. And if you are under a lot of stress and anxiety or pressure, then it's because you're not dealing with your emotional self in a healthy way. So again, this is how we start raising our consciousness to solve our problems because we start having a different level of awareness of our place in this world and who we are. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and I've got actually a very deep, intensive training on this that I'm going to be doing later. I haven't done it yet. I did one about 10 years ago. It was actually one of the reasons why I stopped YouTube 10 years ago and deleted all my content was because some of the feedback I got off of it. Um, but my understanding of it's changed too since then. But we have these levels of consciousness and awareness that we grow through as we grow, as we expand, as we learn. And as we start understanding these different levels of consciousness, we really start to understand this principle of how you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. The mind is your consciousness. The mind is your consciousness. And so, based on understanding what level of consciousness you're at in that moment, you have to shift your consciousness to higher levels of awareness, higher levels of conscious awareness of your place in this world, of this place. Your sense of identity has to shift. Once you start shifting that sense of identity, which is really just what the ego is your identity in this world. And as you shift that consciousness, you can start realizing that you don't have any problems to solve because you don't have any problems. Problems are lower consciousness thinking. And that everything that you think is a problem is only a problem because you believe it to be a problem. So we come into this world and we have these 5 or 7 levels of consciousness that we go through as we enter this world. The first level of world is what we're born with, which is unawareness. It's just this void unawareness. We are born, and each one of these 7 levels of consciousness correlate with our chakras, the 7 energy centers in our body. And the lower chakra, the root chakra, is activated when we are born. And when we're born, and some people even start developing this awareness pre-birth. Very, very few, but some people do have prenatal memories because they started to developing this awareness before they were even born. Um, but this is where we start developing consciousness. Our first level of consciousness is unawareness. If you think about it, baby's born and they really don't have consciousness of the world around them. As they start to grow, they start to develop that consciousness. And it's slow, it's a process that happens over several years, but usually about 3 years old, they develop the second level of consciousness, which is group consciousness. And it's our conscious awareness. This is when we start having conscious awareness of the world around us and our place in it. And we start developing that group consciousness where we define ourselves and our sense of identity comes from our groups. And we usually start developing this level of awareness at about 3 years old. This is also where cognitive memory starts coming in. This is why most people before 3 years old, generally, most people don't have very many memories. Some people do, most people don't. Um, and because that starts developing with that level of consciousness. And this is when we start activating the sacral chakra, which is the second chakra. And it usually happens between 3 and 5 years old for most people. So this develops us into group consciousness, but we also start creating in this group consciousness our identity based on the groups. Most animals you see are in group consciousness. This is why so many animals can't survive without their herd, without their pack, without their flock, because their flock, they are in that group consciousness level of awareness. And so their identity comes from their place within the group, from their consciousness of who they are within their setting of the group. And some people never really raise out of this level of consciousness, by the way. Some people go through their whole life living in group consciousness and never really develop a personal identity. They never really develop their identity outside of their groups. Some people in different aspects of their lives, in their community, maybe political groups. You see people that their entire identity comes from their political affiliations, their political groups, or their religious groups. And I'm not here to talk about politics or religion. That's not what I go into on this channel. But I'm saying some people get their entire identity from that level of consciousness. And they never raise above that. And they never raise their consciousness outside of that. And this is where a lot of conflict comes in. This is where racial groups, people that are, getting into conflict in racial groups. How do we solve those racial indifferences, indignities that we have in this country and in this world? The only way to do that is to raise enough people's consciousness out of this group consciousness of separation through racial conflict. All of this group, this consciousness of we are this group and our group is better than your group. That's really all this group consciousness is. And our group is better than your group, and our group is separate from your group, and our group is different than your group. And in order for our group to be right, your group has to be wrong. This consciousness causes all conflict. This is what causes all wars. War is when you have one group that thinks that they are better than other groups, and all war is conflict between those groups. It's a group consciousness mentality. And we have to raise out of that consciousness in order to end war, in order to find peace. How do we do that? By going within, because until enough individuals find peace within themselves, we cannot raise out of that group consciousness. Until enough individuals within the group raise their awareness out of that group consciousness, we can't find healing, we can't find peace. Again, all of those problems in that part of life, you have to raise the consciousness above that level of consciousness in order to solve those problems. The third level of consciousness, then, and some people never really achieve this level of consciousness fully. Some people do. Generally, people start achieving this level of consciousness between with puberty. So usually between like 9 and 15 years old. I personally kind of started coming into. It's not that we had unconscious awareness of these ideas at lower levels and prior to that, but I really came fully into my awakening of individual consciousness with the activation of the third chakra when I was about 15 years old. That's me personally. Some people go through it earlier, some people go through it later, some people never go through it. They live their entire lives kind of completely unaware of their own identity. Sometimes they even don't even develop that group consciousness and they just drift through life completely unaware of what's going on in the world around them. The other thing is once we open and awaken a level of consciousness, doesn't mean that we live at that level of consciousness. That just means that we are able to reach that level of consciousness. Some people, as we go up these levels of consciousness, people go up and then they go back down, and then we go up, and we have at different times. I have at different times. I've gone back down into this kind of blissful unawareness of the world around me, where I was just kind of drifting through life without really being aware of what I was doing and how what I was doing was affecting the world around me. Even as an adult, I've gone back into that level of consciousness at times. I've been back into that group consciousness at times. Even though I've risen above that level of consciousness in my awareness, I still fall back into that group consciousness from time to time. We all do. This is part of human nature. Once you reach these, you start realizing we start ebbing and flowing through these levels of consciousness. It's not we attain it and we stay there and we never move. We go up and down the scale of consciousness. The scale of consciousness also equates very closely with the emotional scale that we talked about. All the lower emotions come from these lower levels of consciousness on the emotional scale. So as we start developing more awareness, we start also realizing that these lower levels of awareness are really the ego consciousness. And as we are living in these levels of consciousness, we are completely controlled by the ego, our sense of identity in this world, a false identity that we create in this world is what comes from being at this low level of consciousness. And this is something that really helps us to come into. And then we come to the third or the fourth awakening, which is the awakening of the heart chakra. And this is what most people call a spiritual awakening. When you go through a spiritual awakening is when you fully open your heart chakra. You start healing your heart chakra. You start doing work there and you become more aware of spiritual consciousness. And this spiritual consciousness is not an easy process. It's not all bliss and sunshine and roses. That's one of the stages of a spiritual awakening. But a spiritual awakening is actually more darkness than light. Because when you start having a spiritual awakening, you start going through this process, which I started in 2005, and I'm just now getting to the end of that process now in 2021. I've been going through that process, but mine, I had a very long, drawn out spiritual awakening, and part of it is because I didn't understand what was going on, so I didn't really focus on it, and I was opening my heart chakra, but I was going back into these lower levels of awareness. I had a lot of ego resistance to deal with and to heal. And once I started becoming aware of it and started being very intentional about going through that healing process, it went really rapidly. But I was unaware of what was going on. I didn't really understand the awakening process. I was actually feeling guilty and shameful because I was feeling all this way and I was doing all these things, even though I had reached these higher levels of consciousness in the past, but I wasn't living at them. And I was feeling guilty and shameful and depressed and all this other stuff. I went through this really long spiritual awakening process and a really long dark night of the soul. I wasn't broken, but I was wounded and I wasn't healing. I wasn't allowing myself to heal. And I didn't understand that. So me in 2005, I went through my Saturn return, and through that, I ended a marriage, and I ended a lot of connections to things that had done been an important part of my life. I walked away from the Native American spirituality at that point. Um, and I didn't totally walk away. I still practice a lot of things I learned from that way. I still love and respect the people that I connected with in that way. But it wasn't the right path for me. And I knew that. And I went through a ritual that kind of disconnected me from that and led me into where I am now. And then I went through some other events during that next year that led to my full spiritual awakening and activating all of my higher chakras all in a moment. Um, and we went through some experiences that went to one night I went through this experience in Daytona Beach, Florida, and through that experience, I had this full awakening. It's the one and only time I ever been to the beach, and it's one of the few memories that I think about almost every day because that experience had a huge, profound effect. I could tell you what I was wearing. I mean, I can tell you everything. It was one of those mystical experience moments. Hello, Liz, mindfully inspired. Hope you're having a fantastic day. So, and whenever I went through that experience, when I went through that awakening moment, it fully opened up all of my chakras, like instantly. And it was a very interesting night, um, long night. But it also led me into, I was in this really blissful state for a long time, for several months. But then after that, I went into this really deep, dark night of the soul. And it took me a long time to get out of that. This happened in 2005, and I'm just now really starting to understand some of that process I went through in all those years. um, because I didn't understand the process of a spiritual awakening. I just went through this long stuff. But as I did, I started raising my consciousness, and this is where I started activating all of my higher chakras. And as I went through that, I went through the heart chakra opening, and I developed what we call the spiritual awareness. This is when I had studied spirituality for years before, but I didn't really start developing that spiritual awareness until I started healing the heart chakra. And in 2005, when we went through that heart chakra opening, we developed a spiritual awareness. This is when we started connecting with spirit guides and we started getting into more spiritual practices and really getting out of my consciousness that I am this body, that I am this person. And as I started doing that, I started realizing that I was able to deal with those problems from that spiritual perspective and handle my problems in that area in that way as we develop that higher level of awareness. So then we develop into as we go through that spiritual consciousness, then we can get up into the fifth chakra, which is the throat chakra, which is the chakra of communication, not only with people in this world, which is one of the areas I'm working on a lot of healing still in my throat chakra now, which is allowing me to communicate, to do these things that I'm doing here, to create these videos for people and doing the stuff that we're doing on YouTube as well as books and other things. But we also are able to communicate with our spirit guides, with our spirit partners, with our higher self through opening up that throat chakra. And this lets us into the awareness of communication with everything outside of ourselves. We start developing awareness of a bigger picture. We start developing the bigger picture. We haven't fully understood the bigger picture yet at this level of awareness, but we start seeing the bigger picture. We start seeing our connection to everyone around us, which is why we're able to better communicate because now we start seeing our connection to everyone around us. We're starting to see our connection to other people, to the planet, to the planets outside of the solar system and outside of our Earth, and all of the everything that we experience. We start developing this higher level of consciousness outside of ourselves. And so we start seeing our problems from a totally different perspective. And when we develop this level of consciousness, when we raise our consciousness into this level, now all of a sudden problems don't really exist because as we start getting into this level of awareness, we start seeing our place in everything around us and we start realizing that our problems don't really exist in this world. Our problems are something that we created. We start realizing and getting out of the ego consciousness. And as we start healing and getting out of the ego consciousness and creating separation from our own ego, our own false sense of identity in the world, we start connecting better with our higher consciousness. And as we do that and we heal that, then we can move into the third eye, our psychic center. And as we move into that third eye, now we can communicate even more clearly, but we can receive and send information. We start developing an awareness of our full connection to everything. And we start realizing that we are connected to everyone and everything in the world around us. This is when we start getting into the spirit mind and start connecting with the collective unconsciousness, which is where all psychic ability comes from. Is connecting with the collective consciousness, the collective thoughts of all. But we can also, at this level of consciousness, start connecting more clearly and communicating more clearly with uh, higher level non-physical beings, with spirits. This is where a lot of channeling comes from, is activating that third eye chakra and healing and opening and expanding our awareness of that third eye. And as we do that, then we start really deepening our connection to every person that we have. We start having a deeper connection with being able to see through our own fallacies and our own problems that we have created in our own awareness, and we really start breaking free of the ego. This is where we start finding inner peace. This is where we start finding serenity and peace, not only within ourselves, but with other people and with other things outside of ourselves. And this is kind of the level of consciousness I've been spending a lot of my time in recently, is doing this. And this activates our ability to connect more with other people. We connect more with other things. We start realizing that we are connected to those things that we find as being nasty. When we have something that's a big nasty evil that we're trying to fight in the world, we start realizing that we're connected to that. And all we have to do is center ourselves in love and send that evil love in order to dissolve its power. It's the only way to dissolve its power, is to connect, and to connect with ourselves, and to realize that not only are we connected to it, but everyone on the planet is connected to it. So the best way to dissolve these big nasty evils that we see in the world is to raise the consciousness of other people to a place where they can see that connection as well, and they can send it love. This is how we end war. This is how we end poverty. This is how we end self destructive behavior, by raising the consciousness of the planet, not any other way. Not by fighting, not by arguing, not trying to be right over other people. It's by raising human consciousness. It's the only way to find peace on this planet. Enough people individually find peace, it will raise the consciousness of this planet to bring peace as the primary place where people live. But it's the only way. And I believe eventually the world will get there. Part of my purpose, my passion, what I'm doing with this channel is helping to raise that consciousness, helping to show people how to raise that awareness and that consciousness to this level. But once we get to this level of peaceful consciousness and connectedness to everything, then we get into the highest level, the crown chakra, the highest level of consciousness that we can achieve, which is oneness. This is where we truly break free of the ego. This is true enlightenment. And I think that we're on a journey to there. I don't know very many people. There have not been very many people who have ever actually achieved this. This is really where you truly find freedom from the ego. You can only get there by finding freedom from the ego. But once you reach this level of enlightened consciousness, you realize you are at one. And I've reached this level of consciousness myself, but I haven't stayed there. I can get there, but I have to work at it. It has to be very intentional. I have a lot of processes and systems. And this is really what most rituals that you see, most magical rituals, most spiritual practices, a lot of it is about creating energy fields that allow you to raise your consciousness to these higher states and higher levels of awareness. And as you do this, you start realizing, when you get to that oneness consciousness, you realize that you have no problems, that all problems are just illusions of your own ego, and that all problems are only problems because you believe that something didn't go right. And when you get to this level of oneness, you are really recognizing it's not reaching oneness with God, it's realizing oneness with God. It's realizing that you always were one with God, and that God is in you and part of you, and that you are part of God, creator, source energy. And that the vibration, the energy that we call love, all it is God's presence, God's energy inside of us. And that the illusion of disconnection from that source is the ego. The illusion of disconnection from that and out of alignment with that, of that illusion of separation. And that whenever I look at another person, I know I'm looking at God. And when I look at myself in the mirror, I know I'm looking at God. And when I look at the earth, I know I'm looking at God. And to realize that we're all special, but we're all so special that none of us are special. In other words, I look at other people and say, we recognize our differences, but know we are one and we are connected and we are in alignment with each other. And when we can reach this place, we can reach true enlightenment. And this is where we separate ourselves from any and all problems. It's the highest level of awareness we can achieve. You can achieve it for moments. This is what we call, people that achieve that is what we have call having a mystical experience. But these are the people that reach that level of experience. Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, these great ascended masters, this is what they lived, is at that level of consciousness, where they are at a level of consciousness that they lived at one with God. And when you translate their teachings from lower levels of consciousness, this is where religion comes from. It's taking these teachings of these ascended masters and translating them at a low level of consciousness and creating a group consciousness around it, which is based on the ego, which means they mistranslate 90% of what was taught, which is where, as we grow through our spiritual awakening, we grow out of the need for religious teachings, for religious philosophies. It doesn't mean that religion's bad. It's good for what it serves to that level of consciousness. But once you've expanded beyond that level of consciousness, it no longer serves you. In fact, it will, holding on to those ideas and beliefs will bring you back down into those lower levels of consciousness and keep you from growing and expanding further. And this is one of the keys to understanding how we solve our problems. So as we go through, again, this is just really a brief expansion on these expansions of consciousness. But as we realize, then, how do we solve every problem with the same mind? All of this consciousness exists within your mind. All this consciousness is really about understanding the levels of consciousness inside your own mind and understanding where your mind is. So if you have a problem in any area of your life, you figure out what level of consciousness you're at. You raise your consciousness to the next level, and all of a sudden that problem dissolves and goes away and disappears and stops being a problem. As you get into the highest levels of consciousness, you realize that that problem never was a problem to begin with. The only reason you thought it was a problem was because your ego told you it was a problem. And you realize that everything that happens for a reason, for a purpose, not just intellectually. A lot of this you can study, you can intellectually understand this. Until you experience those higher levels of consciousness, you won't really know what I'm talking about. People that have experienced these levels of consciousness know what I'm talking about. People that haven't may try to intellectually understand it, but you can't intellectually know something. Knowing comes from experience of it. In the serenity prayer, which we talk a lot about, it says having the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom to know the difference comes from experience and intellectual study. So you study it, you experience it, and you come to a better understanding of it. That's where true wisdom comes from. And this true wisdom comes from raising our consciousness to higher levels of awareness. That's where true wisdom comes from. Raising our consciousness to higher levels of awareness. Now, you can raise your consciousness into these higher levels and the higher awareness and not do the heart chakra healing. And these are where we call negatively polarized people. This is what we call quote unquote evil people. It's people who raised their consciousness. They were able to reach these higher levels of consciousness, but they didn't do the heart chakra healing, the emotional healing. And so they mistranslate. They never get out of the ego. The problem is that the entities and people that are at this higher level of consciousness, they can't go beyond the third eye chakra. They can't get into that crown chakra healing without doing the heart healing work. They can't go above the sixth healing level and into the seventh healing level without. And this is where you realize different levels of these awareness come to us at different ages, at different stages of growth. And some people will come to them much earlier than others because some people have lived many lifetimes and come to these levels of awareness at different times. I had more awareness of my higher chakras before my heart chakra opening. I actually had some intuitive and psychic abilities developing before even my heart chakra opening, but I wasn't fully able to understand them, and I wasn't able to fully move into that level of awareness and consciousness until my heart chakra opening in 2005. But as I went through that opening, and then I had a lot of healing. I had a lot of karmic healing from past lives to do. I had a lot of healing from this lifetime to do. I had a lot of traumas to deal with, embracing my own past, learning to get outside of my own head, learning to trust myself and my own intuition, learning to trust the messages I received from spirit instead of trusting other people. And it's not that I don't trust other people, it's that sometimes I have to trust my own guidance because what other people tell me when they're at a lower level of consciousness than I am does not align with what I'm learning from a higher level of consciousness and what I'm intuitively getting as I go into my own third eye, as I develop into my own psychic abilities, which we all have. I hear some people say, well, this person's special because they have psychic abilities. We all have psychic abilities. Every single person on this planet has psychic abilities. Some people learn to repress them because their religious philosophies tell them that it's evil. But some people learn to embrace it and say, everything that is in me came from God, therefore it's all good. There is no evil inside of me. It's all good. Some of it's positive, some of it's negative, but it all came from the same source. And this is where we start finding alignment and harmony within ourselves, which is one of the principles that we teach about finding harmony in yourself between your own light and darkness and realizing that it's about finding a balance between the two, not having one over the other. This is where a lot of toxic positivity beliefs, this is where a lot of problems people have is because they're being toxically positive because they're ignoring their dark side. They're trying to repress their dark side and they're not finding harmony with it. They're not finding balance with it. They're not doing that healing work with their own dark side and embracing that part of themselves and making it a part of who they are because they've been told that it's evil, it's wrong, it's bad. We're not supposed to do that. That's sinful. These are negatively polarized ideas that are coming from people that want to control and manipulate because they haven't done their own healing work. So you have to look at the message. You also have to look at where the message is coming from. What consciousness level is that message coming from? If it's coming from a lower level of consciousness than what you're working at, then you shouldn't be listening to those messages because all it will do is get in your way and bring you down. And if you're surrounded by people that are at lower levels of consciousness, I don't want to be the highest conscious person in the room. If I go into a group setting, I don't want to be the one at the highest level of consciousness. Now, I do that at times. I might spend moments there, but that's not what I want to surround myself with. I want to surround myself with people that are at or higher in the consciousness than myself. I hang out on a lot of YouTube channels that are on the understanding this higher consciousness because I want to surround myself with people that have higher levels of consciousness than I have, not people that have lower levels of consciousness. Because if I'm around people that have lower levels of consciousness and I'm not being very mindful and centered in myself, then they can drag me back down to their level of consciousness. And I don't want to do that. I've done that in my life. I've done that in my past. I no longer want to be there. I no longer I want to help raise up other people's consciousness. I don't want to be dragged down to others. There's this saying that says that you are going to be in alignment with the five most influential people in your life. So the people that you surround yourself with are going to determine the level of consciousness you're able to achieve because you are going to be in a status quo with them. This is why sometimes when people go through these awakenings, when people go through understanding and waking up to these higher levels of consciousness, they start losing their ability to connect. They start losing their ability to be in connection with other people. That was the problem. Crap. So this whole thing has really bad audio. I'm sorry about that. That's why everybody left. Probably couldn't hear me. I may have to redo this whole live stream. Because I fixed my audio problem. I figured out what it was. And nobody was saying anything, so I didn't know it was that bad. It was bad. I didn't know it was that bad. Anyway, so as we go through these higher levels of consciousness, then we start getting to a place where we realize that people are not necessarily always right. Even me, I'm not always right. I have my good days. I have my bad days. I go up and down these levels of consciousness myself on a regular basis. But as I go through more and more of these levels of consciousness, the more and more I realize I have no problems in my life, and therefore I have nothing to fear. That every challenge that I face, I have challenges, which means that there are obstacles to be overcome, but I have no problems, which are things that stop me from making progress. I have challenges to overcome to help me in my own expansion, to help me in my own growth, to help me to learn, to become better, to become a higher consciousness being. But I have no problems because those problems are just an illusion of the ego. When you really understand this, you can shift your awareness, you can shift your consciousness, and you can change your life. I hope that these things help you as you continue your journey. I may have to redo this after I see the replay to see how bad the audio was. But until next time, y'all have a fantastic weekend. We'll see